prepare a sermon every Sunday, but it wasn't really all that important. What you were really doing was lots of other things. So he was going to be trained to be an Anglican, but he didn't like the religion courses. So he took all the science courses instead, or all the natural history courses that he could get his hands on. He had two very important tutors at Cambridge, John Henslow, who taught him botany and other life sciences. And he used to hang out with Henslow so much, they would go walking around the campus, that Darwin became known then as the man who walks with Henslow. I didn't know his name, right? He's this weird guy who walks with Henslow. Adam Sedgwick, a very famous geologist. They went on field trips together. Sedgwick would often organize day trips on horseback to the areas around Cambridge. They would pack a picnic lunch and gallop off somewhere and look at geological structures. But Darwin also spent several weeks with Sedgwick in Wales doing some serious geology, and he learned a lot of serious geology from Sedgwick. Now it turns out that Henslow was a lifelong friend of Darwin's and influenced him all the rest of his life, and they had a great friendship. Sedgwick not so much. He was a bit of a romantic. He turned out to be fairly religious. In fact, he wrote devastating critiques of Origin of Species when it was published quite some time later. So they didn't remain very close at all. So he graduated from Cambridge, did respectably well. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because there's some mythologies about Darwin. There are those who think that he was a failed student, he didn't like medicine, he didn't like theology, but he found his own path. There are lots of students at the University of Toronto who think they're going to be doctors when they start and don't end up being doctors. There's nothing terribly wrong with that. He got about the best scientific training you could possibly get in Victorian, well, actually it was before Victoria, but in England at the time. The very best professors in probably the world Darwin was exposed to. So he had excellent training, and that's all it took to be a scientist at the time. There weren't any advanced degrees that the average person would take. So when he graduated, he was a little bit at loose ends. He wasn't going to be a pastor. He wasn't going to be a minister. So he planned to take a trip with a bunch of his buddies to the Canary Islands to study the geology of the Canary Islands. At the time, he was more interested in geology than he was in biology. And then this wonderful opportunity came. There was a ship that was going to be sailing on an expedition to South America. You know the story. And the captain, Fitzroy, needed a companion. Needed someone of his social level, okay, that he could eat dinner with and talk to while on the voyage. Sounds strange to us, but this is the way that society worked. He couldn't eat with the plebs. So you hired, and so you took on a companion who paid their own way, by the way, or at least not in Darwin's case. His father paid the way. Darwin applied. Henslow pushed his application. They couldn't convince Robert Darwin, Charles's father, so he called in the Wedgwood family to carry the day, which they did, and finally he got enrolled as the companion on the boat called the Beagle, which then left on a 5-year voyage around the world. Here's a picture of the boat. It's not a very big boat. It's not a very comfortable boat. And here, of course, is the path that it took around the world. Spending most of the time in South America. This is a blow-up of South America. This is a 5-year trip. So Darwin was gone for 5 years. He acted as though he was the naturalist, but he wasn't officially the naturalist until until the stop in Rio de Janeiro, when the true naturalist, who happened to be the physician, the doctor on board, was sick and tired of the captain treating Darwin as though he were the naturalist, so he quit. And so Darwin became the naturalist. Pretty convenient. So partway through the voyage, Darwin actually officially became the naturalist, but Ethan started off just as companion. You need to understand this is a 5-year trip, but he didn't spend 5 years on the ocean. Most of the time, probably 4 out of that 5 years was spent on land. Touring around in Argentina or the various islands, they would stop at an island for 2-3 weeks, camp on the island, explore the island, collect flora and fauna, explore the geology. So that most of this trip was actually off the boat, living in tents. And Darwin would collect all of this material, fossils that he found, plants, insects, and ship them back mostly to Henslow. Part of it to Henslow at Cambridge, and mostly to the Natural History Museum for people there to store, because it was a bigger location. And this is important because it meant that while voyaging, Darwin was building a reputation back home just by all of the stuff that he sent back and his preliminary descriptions. Men back in England would describe this and publish from Charles Darwin in Argentina or Tahiti or whatever, a description of a new plant, whatever. So Darwin's reputation as a scientist, a collector, and a naturalist was building while he was on this worldwide trip. And not a lot was published. It was more his reputation amongst the intelligentsia and the scientists of the day. When he returned after his 5-year trip, he set up a home in London. And here's a picture of a painting of what he looked like at this time from the trip. He had notebooks, and he used to write in his notebooks all the time. And it's around this time that he started to be thinking about maybe species do change over time. This is a very famous page from the notebook where he draws a tree of life and starts to speculate about how species might have evolved. All this happens after the voyage. It happens after his return, and people start saying, you know, I looked at your collection of finches, you know, and those are actually different species. He said, wow, really? He hadn't had time to examine everything all that closely, but he starts to collect all kinds of information and think about evolution, which we wouldn't call it at the time, think about how things might have changed over time. But that wasn't all that he did. Darwin didn't just publish a book called Origin of Species. He published lots and lots of other books. So here's, in that short space of time from returning on the Beagle 36 until 46, over that 10-year period, he published The Voyage of the Beagle, a 4-volume set of about what he saw on this voyage, and that was a really hot seller in the general public, and again established his reputation not only as a writer, but as a popular writer and a communicator of scientific ideas, because it has lots of scientific ideas in it. One of the volumes was about his theory of how coral reefs form, which was entirely novel, new idea of Darwin. Remember, he's much more interested in geology at this time than he was in biology. So he was a fairly busy man. He started to think maybe about getting married. There's this famous story, some of you might have even seen the letter, where he has 2 columns, to marry, not to marry, and goes through all of the pluses and minuses. And he forgot a few things, and so it ended up that marrying was an advantage. So he decided to get married. So the next question was, well, who should he marry? Well, his father is married to a Wedgwood. His sister is married to a Wedgwood. I know. Let's marry Emma Wedgwood, which he did in 1939. Here's Emma, the woman he chose as his wife, and they lived together in London.